What was the longest night you ever had as a parent? At my son's 4-week checkup, the young pediatrician took his pulse and looked worried. I can't take his pulse. What? I can't count it. It's too fast. I'm thinking, so what? The kid is the right color, breathing, doing baby things. So, what do you mean? Okay, so, you're going to have to take him down the street to the pediatric ER. Now, what? Okay, so, either I call an ambulance right now to take your son 4 blocks to the ER or you can do it. Your choice. Gotta love doctors. I'm not one to panic, so I got him dressed, packed him up, and drove down the street. On my way out, the doctor said, tell the ER reception nurse that your baby is having an SVT. They'll know what to do. Not knowing that SVT meant supraventricular tachycardia, I calmly walked up to the ER nurse and said, our pediatrician said to tell you that this baby is having an SVT. That baby? She said, pointing to my son. Something about the way she said it chased any snarky quips out of my head. Yes, this baby. Oh, she said, and whacked some red button on the wall I failed to notice before. What happened next is blurry in my memory, but I think some kind of alarm sounded and announcements were made in the back of the ER. For sure, my son was no longer in my possession. I followed the nurse back to see them holding him down on an ER bed while they taped electrodes to his tiny body and tried to maneuver an itty-bitty 4-needle into his arm. He started crying at maximum baby volume. I put my hand on his chest to comfort him while he screamed bloody murder and we watched the monitor, which jumped as the last electrode got connected up to 246 beats per minute. Yeah, that's really fast. It's supposed to be like 110 or 120. What are you going to do? I asked. Push some adenosine to reset his heart. Before I can ask what exactly that means, there is sudden silence because my son had stopped crying and seemed a little stunned. The monitor pauses for a second, drops down to 120 something, and the crying resumes. Everyone takes a breath of relief. What just happened? I asked one of the nurses, while grimacing at the sound of my son's constant crying. Apparently God made it very difficult for any parent to stand idly by while their baby cries as loud as they possibly can. Your son's heart was racing out of control, so we stopped it. The brain kicks it back on, hopefully at a normal rate. I'm thinking, you did what? Exclamation mark, but only managed to get out. Why was it that fast? We called the pediatric cardiology group, and the head guy will be down later to see you. Oh, hopefully what we did will keep his rate down, because adenosine metabolizes quickly. As if she called it into being, his heart rate spikes back up to 230, then 240, then 250. Somehow the crying gets louder. The nurses push another dose and he's back down to 120 again. The nurses and maybe a doctor start to gather up and murmur. One walks over to me and says, if he spikes again, we'll have to try something else. Okay. At this point, I'm just playing the concerned parent on this medical drama TV show. I take this moment to call my wife. Honey, everything's fine. But everything is still fine, right? No permanent outcomes, no car accidents, no blood anywhere. Just then his heart rate spikes again. Excuse me, Dad. We're going to have to trigger his vagal nerve. This is the other thing that doctors do. They casually refer to medical terms like you're a med student. You'll see, it should hold better than the adenosine. Aha, of course that's what the vagal nerve does. Every random dad who comes straight from his kid's normal checkup into a scene from Grey's Anatomy knows that. Here comes the part I wish I hadn't seen. Another nurse comes out with a 2-quart plastic bag filled with ice cubes and water. It's called the diver's reflex. If we cover his face with a bag of ice water, then his nervous system will think he's drowning, and naturally slow his heart rate down. Wait, what? The nurse puts the bag of ice completely over my son's face and holds it there a few seconds while another nurse holds him down. He flails his arms and legs in shock for a long second or two, and the beeping on the heart rate monitor goes from 240 something to nothing. No flatline hum like in the movies, just quiet, like it's holding its breath with the rest of us. Then it drops to 120, and my son begins crying again, throwing in a little bit of fury into it, if that's possible. My one thought was that I was glad he would never remember any of this. We had to revisit the ER any time the SVT returned over the next 3 years until his ablation surgery, but whenever we came back, I would never watch them do this again. Technically, I could have done this at home and saved myself the ER visit, but no way. This time his heart rate stayed low, but not his crying. Babies don't really run out of cry like adults do. I held his hand and squeezed his feet and covered his chest with my hand and just listened to him cry and cry. After 20 long minutes, a nurse came over to me and says, "Hey, Dad, why don't you go take a break outside and I'll stay with him?" This is the thing that nurses do. I wandered outside like I hadn't slept in 2 days, and my wife pulled up to the ER. Finally, the cavalry had arrived. After a long hug, my wife and I sat down with the head of the pediatric cardiology unit, not someone you ever really want to meet. He explains that our son has WPW syndrome, which is serious but totally curable with surgery in 3 years or so, after his heart is more developed. However, he said, they have to admit him to the pediatric ICU for maybe a month while they figure out what meds they can give him to keep him stable until his heart grew the required amount. A month. In the pediatric ICU. Just in case you were wondering, it's not a fun place to hang out. That was the longest night, with plenty of long nights to come.